And now here's part 2 of our episode. Ooh, tight song. Not very long. Just goes right for it, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah.
What is it that you dig about that song in particular, Manny? Like, I mean, I think you kind of alluded to it before, but I'm just wondering, like, why is this the standout one on the album for you?
To me, it was really the solo that got me in. So that was, I have to say, that's my bias as a guitar player, right? That solo is incredible. The way it's structured is really, I really love that. The sound that it has, and it's really smack in your face. That solo was recorded by this guy called Elliot Randall, which I didn't know who it was. It was turned out to be a very famous American guitar player, and I think we recorded that in 1 or 2 take right away. So they called this extra member just to join it for that solo, and that structure of that solo for me is amazing because it just comes in, does what he has to do. He kind of just plays some of these, he has some chromatic passages, which I love because they kind of throw you off all of a sudden, and then the guitar goes away, and they're back with that rhythm. So that was really what got me attracted. This song, while I was listening the first time, I'm like, oh, that's a cool song. But then the solo came in, that kind of caught my attention all of a sudden.
I think that's a really well made point though, because of your experience and because of your your life as a guitar player, of course this is going to be something that you connect with right off the bat, and is not something that I typically am not a big guitar solo person. It's not something that I immediately feel connected to. So to hear you say that it's really illustrative of a different relationship with an album than I have.
Right. And one thing, that I like to add is that there are many other songs of Steely Dan where I like the guitar. Also, when there is not a big guitar solo, but like kind of 2 or 3 things. Another song that I liked a lot, and I thought about whether to pick up that as my favorite track, is Keith Charlemagne with from the other album that they have. I
think it's from Pretzel Logic, or is it the Royal Scam? One of those.
Is the Royal Scam, if I'm correct? Yeah, I think it's the Royal Scam.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an amazing one. I was like, oh, that's really cool as well. But then I went to, I wasn't Can't Buy a Thrill by that moment. I'm like, no, I'm going to go for Kings. Yeah.
It's funny because I don't normally associate guitar solos with Steely Dan. Like so in some ways this feels like an outlier to me from the rest of their music.
Well, Walter Baker, probably wasn't. I think it was a great guitar player, but it was more a rhythm guitar player, and he used to do like this kind of easy solo, but I really liked them, right? But then they kind of called all these other artists, like this guitar player here, and then they made them like this incredible solo. So they feel like there are these songs where they're joined by other people, and you're like, wow, that's what it is. That's kind of a huge solo. And they actually, it turned out that all this kind of session men, they've been launched by Steely Dan and became much famous after they played with them.
This whole thing about them being not necessarily as dedicated to touring and being a lot more interested on an artistic level with recording and staying in the studio as much as possible. On one hand, I think it indicates their interest in control over the song, right? They want to be able to tinker and refine to the point where they have this perfect idea of a song. But I think it also leads them to these collaborations in the studio that are hard to replicate on stage when you have that kind of privacy and the kind of intimate space that you're with somebody in a recording studio. You can sort of hear that in the music. I think it is one of the things that makes them unique.
Yeah. I think absolutely that's what really one of the kind of the trait of the Steely Dan, right? That you get all these different sound and everything is worked meticulously. And as far as I read, Donald Fagen was the one who was really kind of tough on being very precise. You got to look into very tiny details to get everything correct at the first time. So that's an interesting thing. I feel like in terms of how the band does the thing. I wish there were more bands like this nowadays. That they would work like that kind of work, really this kind of detailed. But the music industry changed a lot, and I felt with the advent of all different technology, but also the business itself, the way it's done, I feel that doesn't allow taking all that time to work on an album on a specific song as probably used to be back in the day where they had no technology available. They have to figure out everything by themselves and spend days and nights in the studio to make that work.
I would also say, though, that there is, I think the standard bearers of that sort of musicianship, though, might just be coming in different genres now. Like there's this sort of bedroom rock thing that came with SoundCloud and these other, music sharing websites. And particularly in hip hop, too, I think you also see these people who tinker with songs and tinker with sampling in private. We talked about an artist last year named Kaytranada, who's a Canadian DJ and artist, and it's almost like I can feel a similar sensibility. He's deeply collaborative, but he's also very meticulous and particular about his output. So I think that while we aren't seeing as many bands that are kind of playing this kind of rock in that way, I do see their meticulousness and their dedication to this ideal form of a song in other genres. And I think that you probably don't have that sort of continued artistry if you don't have Steely Dan as a and maybe that's a leap, maybe that's a logical leap, but I think that they sort of made this kind of meticulousness, made it cool.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, again, there are different musicians that have been so meticulous and stuff that I don't want to sound like they're exclusive and there are so many. Not at all. And nowadays there are still bands that work a lot on these detail, great artists. So the thing is that I feel like there's been a big change in the industry, the way albums have been recorded and produced. That now they don't probably give all the time, to artists to do that kind of work. And by the time there was not many things around, so you have to really create this. So I will I always appreciate a lot the kind of genius that they were, right?
And they were meticulous without computers. Like, I mean, that's true. Like, that's the difference, is that they achieved a level of precision and meticulousness, that
intricacy.
They couldn't go back and make as many edits as people can make now. Like, I mean, I think about editing these episodes, and I can just trim out a little second of silence whenever I want to on this. They couldn't do that. Everything had to be made in the moment for them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's why I think is also another thing. But these apply also to all the other bands, like in those years, like Pink Floyd. I mean, I can say the same, because they were they were doing the same when they did that Dark Side of the Moon, or yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another great example.
That song, King Richard Nixon.
What do you think?
What I was trying to figure out, because it seems that the main reference was Nixon, right? And when there is also kind of a sort of reference to General Ford all of a sudden. When they talk about this crusade, there seems to be a reference to the Vietnam War. But as far as I know, nothing has been confirmed by Steely Dan on this. So that kind of leaves kind of room of uncertainty around that song. Where are they really alluding to this or not? Reading some review of the album, that's what it seems to be the case. But I think it's open for discussion, and we'll probably never know.
Yeah. While he plundered far and wide, all his starving children cried. And though we sung his fame, we all went hungry just the same. So I mean, I think they're supporting documents.
Right. I think there is good evidence in favor, but when the artist doesn't confirm this, I always feel like, well, I shouldn't just take it, because it might be that that in something else. But I would agree. That seems like really to be the case.
So this podcast is all about identifying a perfect album, and we've acknowledged several times in the past that perfection seems to be pretty unachievable, and yet we're still looking for something that achieves it. And over the many seasons we've done, different people have different standards that they use when determining whether or not something is perfect. So for you, Manny, what makes a perfect album? What are the criteria, and how does this album meet those criteria?
The combination is definitely, in my opinion, is on the one hand, on the kind of on the side of the music and the harmony, as I was mentioning before, all the arrangement that they got, the melody, the sound that they were able to bring into that. For me, that's outstanding. So that's really something really, really cool. And I can say this of other albums of Steely Dan as well, which is why I made this album kind of hard to choose as the thing. What will really make me choose this was that was the first one released, and to me is a masterpiece. So you're really coming out with an album, your first one, it is already a masterpiece. So I'm like, wow, that's really, chapeau, as they say.
Chapeau, yes.
So that's one thing. The other thing that kind of when I start to read more into the lyric and stuff, like what they were really designed to talk about, right? The certain topic, how they were going through this without really kind of, always leaving that kind of uncertainty about what's the ultimate meaning of the song, what is referring to. So I like the fact that there is this kind of, kind of uncertainty of what they're trying to refer to, right? That you can kind of debate about, well, is this actually, that's what they're talking about, or they might referring to something else? Well, we don't know exactly, right? But that seems to be another interesting thing. I love the cover of the album. So if you look at the cover of the album, it's just the color and the way they put it together. And I actually read, because that cover is about like a prostitute that was in France, in this, I can't remember the name of that place where they have all these prostitutes used to go over there. And I think that cover was actually banned from in Spain by that moment when the album was released. It was replaced actually with a picture of the band playing all together.
Cowards.
Another interesting thing about that. So I would say definitely the combination between lyrics, the choice, the selection of music, sound to use, and the arrangement they made, along with the kind of how genius they were in putting together everything, and just releasing the first album like this, what will make it that perfect. So all the other albums, just to compare, right, of the Steely Dan, I love them a lot, but I feel like that came out after, they got trained and working on this album. But this is the first album I was like, wow, that's really like
lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, right.
It's a very impressive first album. I mean, I guess I knew it was their first album, but you saying it again reminded me of that. I mean, I think of some of my favorite bands. I think about Radiohead's first album, not so great. But Pearl Jam's first album, 10, is pretty amazing for a debut album. And I think this, when I rethink of this as a debut album, it's pretty impressive.
And and the thing that now you were mentioning Radiohead, but thinking about other bands as well, is that usually you can see there is a kind of progress, right? When the bands start to develop, they get more mature. You feel like they start to refine maybe either their sound or the way they do the arrangement, or all of a sudden they change. But I felt that throughout Steely Dan, there is always this common thread that listening to different their albums, once they set it up doesn't come by a thrill, they kind of stick to that style of music, always getting inspired from different genre and getting surrounded by great artists in every different album. So I really am not able to see a big progress in terms of, look how better they got after this. To me, they sound perfect since since day one. So and then
that's I think a very well made point, is that their sound has been pretty much consistent over the course of, I mean, obviously now they're in the phase where they're not making any more albums. Really, they're just touring the hits, which bless them. We should all be so lucky to be able to do that, right? But and also Becker passed a few years ago, tragically. So you see that their sound, they kept refining it as opposed to expanding it and experimenting. It seems like it was always just tinkering. We've used that word tinkering a lot, and I think that is a different sort of case for perfection than the case that we've heard for a lot of other bands, which is they've done something that is continually changed or continually revolutionized a sound, that they've been influential in a different way. Like when you talk about Prince, there was always some evolution of what Prince was doing. Whereas with Steely Dan, it's like they established a sound and then they just stayed in that band. They stayed in that sort of area of the scale for their whole time writing songs. So I'm going to give you 3,000 points for making.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to. Yeah, that's something that I got really I was really impressed, because usually you can see progress or changes going through. And I don't know, it might be. I mean, I'm sure there was a lot of progress over there that it might take some more time to figure it out. But when you feel like you already come out with something that sounds great, so now you can just, if you just keep doing, probably you're gonna get the same result. You can hardly make it worse.
All right, so I got to ask: Are there any skips on this album to you? Are there any songs that don't cut the mustard, as it were?
No, that's a tough thing. So I would say that probably Firing the Hole didn't really kind of. I listened to that a couple of times, and it's it's a song that I skip when I go there. Okay, next one.
Oh, really?
But then I like that song like Midnight Cruisers. I'm like, wow, that's another amazing song.
That's a good one.
And also,
Yeah.
talking about the lyrics and the contents, it's interesting. So I would say probably only that one, only the Fire in the Hole is the one that probably would skip a bit more than other. But otherwise, I just like play the album all the way. And actually, no, the one that I skip more, but not because I don't like them, because I feel like I had enough of that song. Is Reeling in the Ears and Do It Again. I'm like, I had enough of this, So that's I do the skip. But among the other thing, really probably only Fire in the Hole.
This was a leading question. This was a leading question that I asked you, because I think that is kind of, in my opinion, the correct take, is that Reelin' in the Ears and Do It Again are so ubiquitous now. Reelin' in the Ears has almost become, I mean, it's obviously a beautiful like virtuosic song in a lot of ways, but to me, it's just so overplayed now that it almost feels a little, I hate to say it, but it feels a little bit like humorous to hear it. I think I've heard it in kind of like joking contexts, or it's been played as sort of like as satirically, as a criticism of Steely Dan in some ways. And to me, that has it soured it a little bit for me. I still love the song, but if there was any skip that I was going to have, it's ironically probably Reelin' in the Ears.
A lot of people sometimes joke too that like songs like that are you can hear them. You walk into any Walgreens pharmacy and you'll hear it playing overhead, which feels out of place, but also that's what that song has been relegated to. It seems like.
But maybe that's another "We Should Be So Lucky" thing, right? Maybe we should be so lucky that a song that we write, a song that a person might write, would become so ubiquitous and so recognizable that it becomes a part of the landscape, right? I think about like with Bowie, like if you think, would Changes be the one for Bowie? Would that be the song that you would just hear in the Walgreens? I'm not sure.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think he has. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of.
Right? We're pro Bowie over here as well.
Oh, yeah, right. But yeah, I would say probably from Bowie might be like Changes or Space Oddity. Probably
might be one.
Yeah, that you can hear a lot.
The Steely Dan has become the standard for dad, like a dad rock, a particular slice of dad rock in America.
I've also heard yacht rock too.
Yacht rock as well. To have become this pillar of like a sort of corny, because the implication there is it's kind of like corny. I'm not sure when Steely Dan became uncool.
Right. That's a good question. When this happened, I feel like, I totally agree with you. It seems to me also to understand that it's kind of a dad song, right? Or as Mike was
absolutely.
saying. Right, and to the best of my knowledge, I'm not a dad, so I still like them.
All right, you get 1,000,000 points for that.
That's interesting to know when this change happened. I remember watching a live concert that the Steely Dan recorded around 2000 on MTV and stuff, and I think all of a sudden there was Fagan and Baker talking, and probably Fagan's asked, so when they really messed it up with music, right? And Baker goes, I guess I don't remember now who said this first, like one of the two anyway. And they go like, oh, really? That was the 80s that they messed it up. But why did they mess it up in the 80s? That was in front of the whole audience. People were, laughing at their ass out. But they were like, what really happened in the 80s was a big change. And I feel like I'm still in love with the 80s music, but I can see what they're talking about.
Maybe there wasn't as much of a place for them in the 80s as they're like, now we get the kind of the rediscovery of it over the years. Maybe that part was necessary. Maybe they needed to have their time to explode. And then they had to go away for a little while, right? Which they did. They stopped touring. And I think that's probably a big part of maybe why they lost a surge in popularity. You don't tour for 20 years, then obviously people aren't going to be able to be exposed to you as much as possible, except through records. So that might have a factor in it. And they weren't touring for any of the 80s. So I think you might have connected the dots there, Manny.
Yeah, there you go. I didn't know about that. They weren't touring. Well, so then that might make sense, even though they're not like, I feel like the only band that in the 80s, like, yesterday night I was in my car and Jethro Tull started playing and I was thinking about, Jethro Tull, and I'm thinking, well, how about them in the 80s? We're talking about complete different band, but I feel like they were big in the 70s, right? And then probably in the 80s they start to kind of fade out and then they got back again later on. So it might be just also like kind of the music evolved in that moment, right? With all the big shift that there was with the advent of some technologies, that this seems like this band didn't really want to kind of get into that.
They broke up in 81.
Oh.
And then got back together in 93. And then what's crazy is that the Two Against Nature, the album that they released in 2000, it won the Grammy for Album of the Year over some other really excellent albums. So, you know, this band has had all sorts of weird peaks and valleys. And I will say that it beat out Kid A for Album of the Year in 2000. So good, well done, Walter and Donald. You committed quite a crime.
I think that might be the seeds of my discontent with Steely Dan were from the 2001 Grammys when Kid A lost.
Manny, you have made an excellent case for an excellent album today, and I think you have taken a tack as a musician that I feel like we haven't experienced much on the pod so far. So you have been a gift to us today, but ultimately this is America and it is a competition. So we need to make sure that you gain enough points to add this album to the pantheon. I'm going to go back over your points now. Okay. So I gave you 1,000,000 points right here at the end for saying that you didn't, to the best of your knowledge, you aren't, to the best of your knowledge, a dad currently. That's very much in the spirit of Steely Dan. So 1,000,000 points for that. 3,000 points for the point you made about how they sort of like started out on a high. They started out with this perfect album that was so intricate and well made. It was almost unbelievable. And then they just sort of remained very consistent throughout the course of their recording career. I give you 642 points for talking about how on Kings, the solo was the thing that hit you really immediately, and how as a guitarist, that making that connection of how guitar solos really speak to you, I think was a really well-made point. 9,000 points for listening to a song 10 times and maybe only after the 10th time really listening to the lyrics and understanding what they're saying. 3,000 points for the groove being the thing for Steely Dan. 900 points for being sort of lazy about discovering music and lazy about being exposed to new music, letting those things float through the ether and hit you when they will. 600 points for never specifically playing Steely Dan yourself. And that not being your relationship with the music, I think was very strong. And those were the points that you got. Plus, you gave me an A- plus a little bit for my ill-fated 60-second intro today. Though I will say I had some good flavor in there, even if I didn't make it through the whole thing. I had some quality flavors happening in there. So that's the board as we see it right now. Michael, I put it to you, my friend.
Okay.
Manny did an excellent job.
Uh-huh.
You've seen the points on the board.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, in your opinion, and based on what you've seen, does Can't Buy a Thrill by Steely Dan go to 11? Is it a perfect album?
I mean, it's an uphill battle for you to do this one because of me. I sort of put my cards on the table early on as not a hater, but just a non-understander. But I will say that there have been some really good points made in this episode. And yes, I will say Steely Dan's Can't Buy a Thrill goes to 11.
Yes.
It's a perfect album.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. You did an excellent job. Dads everywhere are very proud right now. I want to shout out Doug Morell and Greg Muth, two dads of friends of mine who exposed me to Steely Dan in my formative years. This one's for you guys. This one's dedicated to you. Couldn't be happier that we finally got to talk about Steely Dan on this podcast because of you, Manny.
Wow. Thank you, guys. No, actually, I love this. I mean, like, I feel like it's great, not because I didn't have like really a lot of background knowledge on, the band and all the details, because I really never done the job of, sitting down and reading the old biography because I was lazy, right? So I just love like talking around the band and discovering new things with you. That was great. I mean, actually, thank you for this chance. I really love this.
Absolutely. Grazie mille.
Grazie mille. There you go. Piacere mio. My pleasure.
Oh, I love it. Well, that means we need to share with you and our listeners what we chose as our standout track. And Michael, we spoke about this a little bit. Are we thinking of the same one? Did we land on the same one?
I think we are. We're going with Dirty Work. Is that correct?
We're going with Dirty Work.
this is one of the songs when I listen to the album, I'm like, wait, what's happening? Like, it didn't quite seem like it belonged on the album. And frankly, it sounds a little bit more like a Crosby, Stills and Nash song than a Steely Dan song. And like that was the band that my parents listened to growing up. And so that's probably why. I mean, I really dig David Palmer's voice, and I like his 2 songs on the album, as we've established. So for me, this is the standout track. What about you, Tyler?
I think it does. Dirty Work, in my opinion, does. And I'm seeing a trend in myself and in our thought process behind these things, but like, I'm always sort of trying to identify what a band does best, like what they do that no other band does. And I kind of think Dirty Work does a lot of the things that Steely Dan does best. There's a sort of like insistent kind of, not like plotting, but it's a heavy kind of groove. And that happens sort of on the back end of the beat that I think works really well for that song. And then I think it's just and maybe this is a credit to Palmer, it's a very emotional song in a way that a lot of the songs that Fagen sings are not as like openly emotional, which I think is to its credit. And one of the bits of the recipe running through this album that makes it really an all-timer. Like I said, I don't think it's not my karaoke song. I've tried. It doesn't work. I want it to be my karaoke song, but I just have to. I'm still in a beta process for finding out what my karaoke song is. In any case,
find it.
This has been an amazing conversation, Manny. It was so lovely to meet you in Canton last week.
Yeah, I'm sorry we got the chance to talk more. I was about to leave and take off for the weekend, so I didn't know you were coming. Otherwise, I would have stayed. And I know you had to show something you were doing.
We did. We had a lot of fun. We did all sorts of things. But I'll be back.
Yeah, hit me up because I would love to be here and get to talk more about this. I'm glad we were able to get Mike into the Steely Dan team now that gives this 1 goes to 11. Wow, great job.
I don't know if I'd say I'm on the Steely Dan team. I'd say maybe I'm like the pinch hitter or something. I don't know. Like I'm not. I don't know. Did I use that baseball reference correctly?
Last thing before we close, I love 2 things that you guys said about Dirty Work. That I never thought about comparing that to Crosby, Stills and Nash, which is actually when you said that, Mike, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of that thing. That's an interesting comparison you threw out there. Very cool. So that's big shout out for that, and big shout out for you, Tyler, when you mentioned that's kind of a very emotional lyrics and song that usually Fagen doesn't get to do that. I think you're totally right, because that's true. There is also this song Midnight Cruiser that probably reminds me a bit of that kind of emotional thing, but not as much as Dirty Work. So I really appreciate this last 2 take you had on this Dirty Work that I never thought about. That's really cool.
Thanks, man. We're thinking about music in all sorts of different ways because of this podcast, and being able to articulate it, I think, is one of my favorite things about this. So I'm glad you concur.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Well, Michael, do you have anything else for our listeners before we peace out for the week?
No, I think it's time to let them listen to the standout track and move on to another album already.
Yeah, it's going to be sweet. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and this is Dirty Work by Steely Dan.
Bye.